Yeah, I think everyone has value, right? You have to understand, especially as a military member, as a military veteran, what is your value? You see, a lot of times in the military, we have these annual performance reports. In the Air Force, it used to be called our officer performance reports. It's now called something else, right? Either way, it's a performance report. It's an annual performance report. And they do this thing called racking and stacking us or stratification. So there could only be number one, there could only be one number two. And then typically, once you get outside of that top 10 to 15%, they no longer stratify you. And so people are fighting to see who's going to be number one. And then what ends up happening is the challenge and the mistake that people make when they're getting ready to transition from the military environment, from the military construct, and go into the civilian world. They are looking at what their performance reports said, and they are thinking that that is actually what their value is. And so they're saying, oh, I wasn't number one. Oh, I wasn't number two. And I don't realize how much value I have. And I'm not valuable enough. I'm not actually good enough. And maybe I don't qualify for this job. Here's the reality. There are over 330 plus million people in the United States. And of the 330 plus million people in the United States, less than a half a percent are even qualified to wear the uniform and serve in the military. And then you start going down further and doing the mathematical equations, and you realize how many are actually officers. How many have actually done the job you've done? How many have actually done the specific thing that you've done in the military? And you start realizing that you're in a very small group of people. Now, you were competing amongst your peers within that group, but once you step outside of that space, you're now competing in a completely different environment. I am not saying that you are better than anyone else. I'm not saying that military is better than civilian, but what I am saying is understand what your value is as a military veteran. Understand what your value is for someone who has served this nation. Understand what your value is based on the level of responsibility that you were given, based on the level of competence, based on all of the different things that you are required to do to be good at your job. You see, in the military, while you might not be number one, number two, or number three, you had to be good to continue to do your job. You had to be good to continue to progress and get promoted. And so when you're starting to look at, I want to transition from the military to the civilian world, you now need to look at your value in a different way. You need to assess your value in a different way. And for me, the way I view it is if an organization, military or civilian, is willing to pay me X, then that means I'm likely worth at least 3 to 5 times that value. Now the question is what can I do and how do I extract that value? For some of us, what we do is we realize what our value is and we find someone to help us write that CV, write that resume, and step away from all the military jargon, step away from all the military talk, and we write it in a way that captures our essence, captures our authentic value, and creates a value proposition for that company that we want to be hired by. And so we now have created a job that had us going from making whatever the number was we were making in the military to 3, 4, and 5 times that number because we understood value and we understood how to articulate that value in a resume and an application as well as in the interview. But that requires us to, one, understand our value, two, to be able to articulate it, three, to be able to advocate for it, and to be able to actually speak to that when it comes to the interview process. Many of us, we don't take the time to do that. And a lot of times that requires an investment of our time as well as an investment of our money and resources to allow us to get the training, to get the education, to allow us to hire that person to help us write that CV or that resume, to get the training, to get the coaching on how to do a job interview. Because you won't have the ability to fully extract your value if you don't make those investments. Some of us, like myself, instead of going to work for someone else to extract that value, I have chosen to be an entrepreneur. I've chosen to start my own business. And I quickly understood what my value was, and I continue to I continue to increase what my rates were based on my value, real and perceived. And then the other side of extracting the value for me as an entrepreneur in the space that I operate in is I had to understand that in order to articulate my value, I had to have the right digital assets that would showcase my value. What do I mean by that? As a professional keynote speaker, coach, executive coach, facilitator, doing workshops, thought leader, all these different elements of the business that I'm in, what I had to do is I had to make investments. I had to invest in a great website, not a mediocre, okay website. I had to invest in a great website, had to invest in a great demo reel to showcase what I'm truly capable of on the stage. And then I had to invest in my brand. And then I didn't do it just one time. I did it various times along the path, and I will continue to do that because I will always need to update that. If I decide that I want to increase my fees, I'm going to need to ensure that I justify those fees based on my digital assets. That took significant amounts of investment. What does that mean? That means I had to bet on myself. Some of us are afraid to bet on ourselves because we don't truly believe in what our value is. You can't extract your value if you don't even truly believe and understand what your value is. But once you understand and once you believe in what your value is, then you have to be willing to believe enough, trust yourself enough to then bet on yourself. And sometimes that means you're going to have to actually go into your bank account, go into some of your investment accounts, maybe even go into your retirement account, pull some of that money out and bet on yourself so that you can actually fully articulate in a digital manner what you're worth and what you're capable of. But trust me when I say that if you're a military veteran, you have value. You just have to understand what it's going to take for you to extract that value. You have to then figure out what and how do you actually express and showcase that value. You're going to have to find the right coaches along the way to help you to get there. You're going to have to find the right people to help you create those digital assets along the way. Because it's not until you do that that you will truly be able to extract the value of what you're capable of. You see, my job was to fly airplanes in the Air Force. I was a squadron commander in the Air Force. I did all these different jobs in my time, in my nearly 27 years of being in the uniform. And while I am an airline pilot, I spend the majority of my time as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as a keynote speaker, doing keynote speeches, doing workshops, facilitating discussions, fireside chats, executive coaching. I spend the majority of my time doing all of those things because I figured out how to extract the value. I tell you that contradiction, not necessarily a contradiction, but I tell you that juxtaposition because while I flew airplanes in the Air Force, I no longer have to fly airplanes based on what I know I'm capable of doing, and I've extracted that value. So for you, whatever that job is that you have, it doesn't mean that you have to go and do that exact same job in the civilian world. You can take the job that you did and understand what traits were required, what skill sets were required. And then you then begin to understand, how do I leverage those traits? How do I leverage those skill sets to then allow me to be of value and add impact to an organization or to multiple organizations through my own business, my own consulting, whatever the case may be. And that's where you start truly extracting your value. So you don't have to do the exact same job that you did in the military. You don't have to be burdened by the thought that no one is going to hire me to do X because I did X for X amount of years in the military. You can choose to do whatever you want. You just have to figure out, how do you go from what it is that you did in the military, what skills did it require, what traits did it require, what skills and traits did you learn along the way, and how do you translate those into being able to help an organization or help multiple organizations or multiple people and make an impact in a great and positive way based on your experience that you've had during your time in the military. That's what it means to extract your value. So if someone is willing to pay you X, the likelihood is that your value is actually 3 to 5 and sometimes as much as 10X of what they're willing to pay you. And there's nothing wrong with what they're willing to pay you if that is comfortable for you. But if you want more and you think you're worth more, then figure out how to actually articulate that value and then figure out how to go after that value and be willing to bet on yourself.